Good evening. My name is Dr. Rochelle Matthew Somerville, and I will be your moderator for tonight's discussion. I am a homeschool parent of 6, and I have been homeschooling for almost 14 years now, and currently I am one of the 13 educational consultants here at HSLDA, and I am thrilled to be here with everyone this evening. I'd like to take a moment to thank HSLDA for hosting tonight's event. For almost 40 years, HSLDA has helped make homeschooling possible for millions of families. We are the world's largest homeschooling support organization. We are member supported with over 100,000 families who trust our team of lawyers and expert educational consultants to answer questions and resolve problems. We also serve as a voice for the homeschooling community and work hard to make sure your right to homeschool is always protected. It is our pleasure to offer seminars like this to help millions of families confronting a new and unusual school environment. Tonight, we're talking about deschooling. What does it mean? Why is it necessary? And how do you do it? When a child has attended public or private school their entire lives, they become very much used to a specific way that the school is traditionally done. Once you begin homeschooling, it introduces a totally new paradigm and breaks a lot of the norms that many think are necessary as a part of school, such as inflexible schedules, group management routines, and classroom-based habits that just take up time that, as the homeschooler, are not necessarily needed. Helping your child break out of those traditional school mindsets and adjust to new routines of homeschooling is a process that we often call deschooling. So tonight, we'll be talking with a panel of homeschool parents and teachers who will be able to answer the toughest questions about how deschooling works and share some of their own experiences as well. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's panel. Joining us is Dr. Peter Gray. Dr. Peter Gray is a research professor at Boston College. He is also the author of Free to Learn and Psychology. He's conducted and published research in neuroendocrinology, developmental psychology, anthropology, and education. His current research and writings focus primarily on children's natural way of learning and the lifelong value of play. He's a founding member of the nonprofit Alliance for Self-Directed Education and a founding board member of the nonprofit Let's Grow. Welcome, Dr. Gray.
I'm very happy to be here, very excited about it.
We are excited to have you. Next, we have Stacy Lekumel. She is a homeschool mom of 2. This is her 7th year homeschooling with her kids, and she currently has a 5th and 3rd grader. Prior to staying home with her kids, she taught both in the private and public school systems. Stacy, welcome.
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm super excited to be here and share with everyone tonight.
And finally, we have our new homeschooling mom of 3, Sandra Kim. She and her husband are homeschooling with 3 kids, 7th grade, 3rd grade, and 1st grade. And they have been unschooling since March and started their journey in homeschooling this fall. Making the shift in thinking has been challenging but rewarding to understand that learning happens everywhere. Welcome, Sandra.
I am so excited just to share a little bit about what we have been learning and just to learn more about how we're on the right track. So thanks.
We are excited. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to thank our panel tonight. And please feel free to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions that may pop up that you may have. Before we get too deep in the conversation, though, I want to just briefly unpack some of the terminology that you're going to hear that we're going to be talking about this evening. So if you're a parent who's beginning to transition your child from traditional school to homeschooling, deschooling is often the first step. So deschooling is typically that adjustment period that parents and students go through. Everyone needs time to decompress and unlearn habits that they have learned from a rigid school environment. The term unschooling tends to refer to a homeschooling style that's focused on a child-focused learning without the formal structure. And it's based on natural learning and following the child's interest. And when we refer to homeschooling, we're referring to students not only being educated at home, but also parents serving as the full-time instructors and administrators of their educational programs. So let's unpack deschooling a little bit. So deschooling is a term, as I said, that many are unfamiliar with if you're first starting on your educational journey. So let's talk a little bit about what you all on the panel think about when you think of deschooling. Dr. Gregg, what comes to mind when you think about deschooling, or what can you offer to new parents in terms of understanding
Yeah,
deschooling?
so the transition from having your children in school and now doing homeschooling, or what in the UK is called home education, a term that I actually prefer because you're not necessarily doing schooling at home, you're doing education in a broad sense. And so it's important to not think that what you're going to be doing at home is to replicate school. You're not going to sit down your children, and every hour bell is going to ring and you go from one subject to another, and you're not going to test them in the same way, and so on and so forth. There's a whole range of ways that people do homeschooling. I don't want to say that there's one right way to do it. There's a whole range of ways to do it. But I think what most people learn once they start the homeschooling journey is that trying to mimic school at home doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well. It doesn't even really, to be honest, work very well at school, but it certainly doesn't work very well at home. You have so many advantages with home education because you know your child. You know your child. And you can interact with your child. In schools, they can talk about child-centered education, but it can't really occur in school. That with 30 kids in the classroom. But at home, it can occur. And at home, you can allow, you know your child's interests. You can allow your child to develop their interests. Your child is going to learn, let's say your child is learning to read. Your child is going to learn to read by reading what the child is interested in, not by what some assignment, some curriculum says, this is the way to learn to read. You know what your child is interested in. Your child knows what your child is interested in. I mean, that's just one example. So the general term deschooling, and I've done some research on families who've gone from regular school to homeschooling, and I've asked, what's the biggest challenge? And the biggest challenge by far is getting out of their own heads, the parents getting out of their own heads the idea that I am doing something wrong if I'm not replicating school at home. I'm doing something wrong if my child isn't learning at exactly the same track and exactly the same pace as they would at school. It's hard to learn to just really trust yourself and trust your child, and to get out of your head this idea that you've got to replicate school at home. That's really what deschooling is from the parent's point of view. From the child's point of view, depending upon where your child is in the educational process. If your child has been doing school for a while, here's what I think many families find. That child needs a period of decompression. That child may go through a period of looking like, I just don't want to do anything. But don't let that, don't get too upset by that. Some kids who've gone from school, especially those who've been high pressured about it, just simply need a period to decompress. They need a period to play. They need a period, maybe they're going to play video games, whatever they're going to do. Don't get upset about their doing that. Don't think that they've got to kick off right away on some high achievement track. Don't be disappointed by that. The whole, in a nutshell, what you've got to do when you're homeschooling is trust yourself and trust your kids.
Well,
Absolutely.
I agree with you. I wish that I had heard that 13 weeks ago when I was trying to replicate school at home, and then that didn't work. Trying to get started on all cylinders, and that didn't work. So, it was like process of a trial and error to get to a point where we are now.
I think that's absolutely great. Now, Stacey, you have been homeschooling for 7 years. Tell us what it looks like in your house.
I guess the biggest thing that I would say is that learning is just a lifestyle. It never stops. It never starts. I mean, my 10-year-old said it perfectly as everyone's posting their first day of school pictures. She's like, Mommy, we don't need to do that because we only have one first day of school and one last day of school. So she like this concept of a school year and a school day and summer break is just totally foreign to them. We go through life and we learn, and it might be on a Saturday, it might be on a Friday night, it might be on a Tuesday morning, but learning is the lifestyle that we've tried to cultivate in our house, and it doesn't start or stop because the bell rings.
That is actually an excellent point. And, you know, the interesting thing is, I think that, as I mentioned before, I have 6 kids, and most of my learning that happens with my kids, I think, comes outside of the designated school hours. When we take those trips, or through a conversation, or when we're sitting down watching a debate and they're saying, well, why is this? And what is this? And, you know, and they're asking those questions, and through those conversations is probably when they learn more than when we open the book and we try to do learning the traditional way. And so I think that's an excellent, excellent point, Stacy. I think that's great. Reassuring parents that whatever they're doing, whatever engagement is oftentimes a really, really tough one. But I think that Dr. Gray nailed it when he said, just trust yourself and trust your kids. I think that's really, really powerful.
Well,
you know,
I was just gonna jump in and say, like, there is no right or wrong way to do it. Like, you can experiment, you can try different things. There's nothing right or wrong, and nothing you do will destroy your kids. You know, you are always able to learn and modify and adjust and do what works for you, not what someone on a webinar is telling you to do or what a book tells you to do. Adjust.
Absolutely. And in fact, interestingly, our team at HSLDA recently did a whole seminar on this very topic, reassuring parents that yes, you are qualified to teach your children. And, you know, our team will post that link in the free recording in the chat if you're interested. It was called, Am I Qualified to Homeschool? Yes. And so it was a great webinar. But, you know, one of the biggest adjustments to new homeschooling students in the paradigm shift between learning in traditional classrooms and learning at home is, of course, not only that, can I do it, but how does it look different? What does it look like? Could you give some specific examples? We started to talk about that a little bit, but how is it different? What does it look like specifically?
You know, for us, a lot of it is just that we might sit on the couch and have a conversation. We go on field trips and we talk about stuff, and we're outside, or math comes up when we're cooking in the kitchen. It's amazing the number of times that just natural opportunities flow to reinforce what you've learned. And we do follow curriculums and do have some more structured times to our day. But honestly, the best learning happens when we're out in the real world and we can connect with that book learning and make that book learning more authentic. So getting out in the world is a great way to do it, and just exposing your kids to all sorts of different things.
Dr. Gray, what about those moms or even the students that say, I don't know this information. How in the world do I teach it? What do you say to those parents and students?
You know, I think this is another kind of schoolish idea, is that children learn primarily by being taught. That may sound like a strange statement to say, no, children don't learn primarily by being taught. Children learn primarily by their own exploration, by their curiosity. When they learn from you as the parent, most what they learn is when they want to learn something and you may be able to help them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know all the answers. You know, if any education would be a disaster if all you learned is what the teacher knows. Wow, what would be the point of that? You know, what you want to learn is you want to go way beyond what any other person knows in the things that you're interested in. And in this day and age, you know, this is a wonderful time to be homeschooling. In this day and age, information is so readily available. You know, anything you want to know, you can find a lecture on it. You can contact people who are experts on it on the web. You can find a YouTube on it. You know, all of the Harvard lectures are on there, and they're actually, some of them not that difficult to understand. There's so many ways to learn. So let's say you know, let's say you've got a high school age kid, and if this person, for whatever reason, maybe because they want to go to a college and they believe that they need to understand higher mathematics of a certain kind, and you know, you may have taken some of that in high school, but you don't remember any of that. There are dozens of ways for that person to learn that, you know, Khan Academy, various different ways of doing it. You just don't have to be the expert. What you have to be, in a way, is kind of the support system in this way. You know, I'm cheering you on, you know, and also you want to be, the other thing I think, the other danger, I think, is to, this is a danger from regular school. Children are under a lot of pressure. Children, you know, young people in our society are suffering at high levels from anxiety and depression because of the pressure of school. Don't put that pressure on your kids. Your kids are going to be okay. Trust your kids. Don't use homeschooling as a place to apply even more pressure. If your child isn't ready or doesn't want to learn some particular thing, it's okay. It's okay. They're going to be okay. And the reason I can say that is because I've done a lot of research on grown unschoolers. Now, unschoolers are people who are in homeschooling families where there was no curriculum required. The children were pursuing their own interests. And most of these children were not studying conventional subjects. And yet, the majority of them went on to higher education. All of them who really wanted to go on to higher education did. In this study of 75 grown unschoolers identified, they were in good jobs. So it's kind of a myth that your child has to go through a certain curriculum, that some geniuses in the school system have figured out exactly what everybody has to know to succeed in our society. It's simply not true. Whatever your child chooses to really pursue, they're going to learn a tremendous amount pursuing that, not just about the specific subject. Let me give you a little example. My own son grew up self-directed in his education. He didn't do any curriculum. You could say that he majored in Dungeons and Dragons. He was, you know, Dungeons and Dragons at that time was, you know, the video games. It was not a video, it was a regular game you got together, but it had the same kind of reputation as video games. It was, oh, no parents wanted their kids to play Dungeons and Dragons. Well, my kid played Dungeons and Dragons all the time. The things he learned in Dungeons and Dragons are incredible. He learned probability theory because there's all these multi-sided dice. And he actually, when he was 11 years old, he wrote an article for Dungeons and Dragons magazine on the probability of throwing a particular character given the dice. He got fascinated by medieval history because he was interested in that. He read extensively of that. So, and he developed an interest in history generally and politics generally, and went on to college to study those subjects. It was no detriment at all, the fact that he didn't do all those other traditional subjects. He did what he was interested in, and he learned a great deal. So the point I'm trying to make is, let your child tell you what the child wants to learn. That doesn't mean, you know, I know there are different ways of doing it. That doesn't mean that you can't make certain suggestions. You can't suggest a curriculum. You can't even impose a curriculum. I personally would not impose a curriculum. That's my approach to it. But what I'm saying is, don't worry about relaxing about the curriculum.
I mean, I think that's incredible, and I'm glad for your success for your son. But a lot of my friends who are maybe homeschooling for this year only want to track a little bit. So maybe deschooling a bit, and then, you know, covering some topics. And I mean, for my daughter, you know, the goal is college. And so I want her to take pre-algebra this year and continue on her math track. But on that same note, you know, she really enjoys, you know, creating and baking and being very entrepreneurial. So it started with, you know, just like every kid does, a lemonade stand, but it got pretty fancy. There were toppings and things like that. And then it turned into a dog treat business. So, you know, she has all these different ideas and she's trying them out. And, you know, in that she's learning, and through that she's understanding, you know, these are her sunk costs and these are her, and it seems like fun to her. So just understanding that learning is happening all the time everywhere. And even as I was telling you about my daughter, who was, I gave her my old video camera, and she was making a little, you know, movie with tiny Legos and, you know, moving their little arm and taking, you know, she's doing a, you know, stop motion movie. So, you know, just kind of letting them explore what their passions are, and finding out, you know, if they're really interested in things is been really exciting to watch, just right there on the sidelines, which we really never had time to do because we were always on the run in our previous pre-pandemic life.
Well, that's great. Like, parents just do not give themselves enough credit in the fact that they are experts in their own kids. You know your kids, you know how to help your kids. And really, like, one of our major goals is that we teach a love of learning in our homeschool. And my kids leave the house with a love of learning, because learning is going to be happening all around them for their entire lives. So teaching them how to learn and making it enjoyable is really what you need. And parents just trust that you really are doing what's best for your kids because you love them and you want their best more than anyone else does.
Absolutely. I mean, this conversation is so needed. I see a couple comments that that the parents, I see Andrea had mentioned that she needs to deschool. Absolutely. It is much a process for the parents as it is for the children to actually go through the process of deschooling and change the mindset, because I think when you are transitioning from the traditional public school to a homeschooling situation, you have to get out that mindset that it has to be a certain way. There was another question about schedulings, which Sandra touched on a little bit, that some people need a little bit more structure. And they do. And to that, my response to that is you can always provide flexibility within structure. So that's the theme in my house, is that my kids have lots of choices, but I am always in control. There's a lot of flexibility in what they can choose to do and when they can choose and where they can choose. I mean, there's so many choices, it's almost that they don't realize that they're not in control, but there are still always parameters put around what they can do. We function in routines as opposed to schedules, meaning we have a morning routine, we have a breakfast routine, a lunch routine, you know, a work routine here. We have an evening routine as opposed to punching a clock at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So we don't punch a clock for schedules per se, but we function in routines because unfortunately we would never get anything done if I had to punch a clock to meet a schedule anywhere. I try, but I'm not that successful. But besides the logistical differences with schedules and work routines, there's also a big difference in teaching. And parents can give their children a comprehensive education without being focused on teaching to the test. Can you explain more about how that impacts the quality of education you're able to deliver in your own families, per se, in a homeschool environment? Because in the traditional environment, testing and testing and testing is typically the way that we measure success or growth, but that's not traditionally the sole means of how we do it in the homeschool. Can you give examples of how that might look in the homeschool world if we're not testing our kids the same way as we do traditionally?
I can say that I came out of that mindset of testing and learning and drilling, and to understand it's more about mastery and understanding. And so it took definitely the past couple of weeks for my third grader. She's 8 and she's doing, you know, carryover, addition and subtraction. And, you know, I would assign a certain number of pages, but we would do it side by side. So I would catch her mistake as she was making it. And, you know, she just got very frustrated because she's like, I have 4 more pages to do. And you don't. You maybe have 4 more problems. Let's get this done. And she got really excited and she's like, well, then I'm done. And I said, yeah, you know, I just want you to understand what happens when you carry over. It's not about that we're going to get all these pages done. And so that was really hard for her to understand because she's used to checking boxes off and getting the work done. It's not about understanding, it's about just doing it all. So, you know, and it took me a long time to understand that, you know, it's mastery that I'm shooting for and not getting through it and catching up, because we're not catching up to anybody. We're just moving at the pace and moving our children further along at their own pace. So it's been so fun.
I say I'll speak here to like the science and the history and maybe like the not quite so linear subjects. And when we do something, we just have conversations and we talk and we ask questions and we read together, and their questions, as much as their answers, actually give me an indication of where they are and how much they understand. You know, just one little example, my kids love clay. And so we were reading about coral reefs. Now I couldn't even think of it. We were reading about coral reefs. And here my son made a sea anemone with with the clownfish hidden inside of it. And he just did that all on his own because he understood that those two animals went together. And that's a much better, and he was able to explain it. And that's not something I have recorded on a piece of paper to prove to anyone, but I know that he is learning and he's growing in his knowledge and his understanding.
I think one of the great advantages of homeschooling is that it's not oriented towards passing tests. In some sense, school education is undermined by trying to pass tests, because then all you're doing is you're just trying to learn the answers to the test questions, and you're memorizing it until you take the test, and then you forget it. And that's very different from real intellectual understanding. Somebody in the chat said, you know, you're only really learning when you're having fun. And I kind of agree with that. I would say you're only really learning when you are intellectually immersed in it, when you're involved in it. If you're just learning it for a reward of an A on a test or the fear of an F on a test, you're not really learning it in a substantial way. And so when you allow your child to pursue their own interests, they are really learning in a deep way. I often make the distinction between academic development and intellectual development. So academic development is sort of things that can be taught, and they're not that difficult to teach. Things like, you know, the multiplication in mathematics, for example. Academic development is memorizing the multiplication tables, you know, learning the algorithm for adding two digit numbers, and for subtraction, and for log division, and so on. Things that, by the way, nobody ever does anymore anyway, because we all carry a little calculator in our pocket. That's academic development in mathematics. Intellectual development in mathematics is one understanding what this is all about. What actually is multiplication? When would you do it? Why would you do it? You know, how intellectual development is what tells you, you know, if I'm painting a room, you know, and there's this many square feet. I mean, first of all, what does square feet even mean? It's not as a memorized concept, but what does it really mean in terms of the walls of my house, right? And in terms of how many gallons of paint do I have to buy? Now, the kid who if you allow your kid to paint their own room and they have to figure out how to do that, they're learning real mathematics. They're developing a real intellectual understanding of mathematical processes and why you would do those things. Very different from going through worksheets in order to pass a test. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, and I think, so coming out of the public school and the private school, I definitely have had to deschool myself, and I still have to. Like, I get myself caught in that trap all the time. But my kids have never asked me, will I have to remember this after the test? But that is a question I had almost daily in the classroom. And it has nothing, the tests don't matter. Like, it's the learning that matters. I do, like, someone posted a question about the SATs, and I will say, like, for example, my kids do take standardized tests because learning how to take those standardized tests is a skill that they're going to have to develop for higher education. You know, so we still, like, we do some of that, we balance some of that skill development while we're doing more of a freestyle learning, if that makes sense a little bit in there. So we do balance a little bit in there. But yeah, my kids don't learn for a test. They learn to learn and have fun, and they don't know any different.
Absolutely.
There's another question that somebody raised that, while it's on my mind, maybe I'll just say a word about it. I think this is a consideration that probably depends upon where you live and what your state laws are, and even what your local school board is requiring of you. But how do you present to your school district that you are actually doing education? And of course, this is a special challenge for those who are doing unschooling. So I've learned a lot about how the unschooling parents do this. But what they've learned, I think, applies to everybody in a sense. The parents become very good at translating what the children are doing into academic language. So your children are cooking in the kitchen, but they're not just cooking in the kitchen, they're doing math as they're cutting recipes in half. Or they're helping out in the workshop and they're measuring boards and they're doing math. Or you're on the beach and they're collecting stones, they're doing geology, right? They're watching programs on the History Channel. They're doing history. They're reading some interesting thing that's to them. So you get pretty good at being able to translate. They're collecting butterflies, and it's biology. So parents get pretty good at that, and you don't have to feel bad about doing that, because this is real. The kid collecting butterflies is doing real biology. That's like what biologists do. What they're doing in the biology class in school is not what biologists do. They don't memorize facts about biology, right? So you don't have to feel bad about that. You're doing the right thing when you translate your child's actual activities into that kind of language.
This whole conversation takes me to the idea of authentic learning. My oldest is graduating this year, and to piggyback on what Stacy was talking about from the question in the chat about the SATs. And so of course we're in that zone right now with the SATs and ACTs, and yes, they are important. My son is on a track where he wants to go to college, he wants to be an engineer, okay? And so math is important. And so for the last year, we have definitely hit that area where his learning has exceeded where I went in high school. So right now, my son is taking AP calculus. Let me tell you, you're talking about gibberish on a piece of paper, so we are past the point where mama is now teaching. I am honestly the lead learner. And so I have had to learn to sit back, and he is excited about coming to me and showing me what he knows. And I am side by side. We will watch videos together, and we will read the textbook, and I will listen to whatever he can explain. But my point of it is that for the last 2 years, I have put him in classes to do SAT prep and things like that. And I honestly want to tell you, he got absolutely nothing out of it. I kept saying, what in the world is going on? I mean, your traditional SAT prep classes that I signed him up for, I think I taught 1 or 2 of them, thinking that maybe that would help. I could not get him to invest. But the way he invests in anything related to higher math is just ridiculous. When I see him, he will spend so much time in his calculus book because that is his interest. He will not stop until he figures out a challenging problem, because that is his interest. And it will be more difficult than anything I can put in front of him. So the authentic learning piece of it is a big piece of it. When it comes to the writing and grammar part, I've given him those easy grammar books and those traditional books. And again, it's like copy work for him. There's no thoughtful process. But if I say, hey, can you help your brother? There's the authentic learning in it. I mean, it's not his work, but if he has to teach it to somebody younger, there's the authentic learning, and it translates. And so I think sometimes part of that deschooling is thinking outside of the box in terms of how you're going to make the learning authentic. And so I think that is a great conversation. And again, just because we've been homeschooling for years doesn't mean that we don't backslide into some of those traditional thought patterns, like Stacy said. So I'm right there with you, Stacy, and I'm 14 years in. And so every once in a while I think, oh, well, they're testing, maybe I should be too. So
I'm 4 weeks in, and I'm all in. I mean, we have a large deck on the back of our house that backs to a little forest. And so last week was biology. We saw, we just happened to, my kids brought in this really scary looking caterpillar, and it happened to be one of the last monarchs. And so we threw it into this little plastic cup, and then it butterfly. And so we got to see it, and then it wasn't very strong. So then we, fed it sugar water, and it was, it was like not planned. It was not planned. So, you know, that day was an hour of being outside watching the butterfly, you know, dry its wings. And then, you know, then they looked up all the information about it, and then we watched it fly away, and my daughter was like, goodbye to Mexico. You know, like, but I learned so much, and we had so much fun, and I'm sure that you know, is sticking with them much better than, you know, butterflies migrate, you know, in a book. And then the same thing with the praying mantis. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but praying mantis eat all sorts of weird things like toads and frogs and birds, like a little bug. But anyway, so a praying mantis was on our deck. And so the kids went out back and they dug up like little water beetles and all sorts of things. And then we saw the praying mantis come. It was like National Geographic in this little plastic. We got to see it. So but it's not on the time schedule. I want everything to fit into a slot. And I'm like, this is not the right time, but that's when it's happening. So it's exciting, but it's really hard because I'm at the front end of this, and it's like, it's mind bending.
Let me take the SAT problem and relate it to the larger issue of deschooling. So in school and in our schooling mindset, we have this view that learning is progressive and it occurs, you know, you learn A before you learn B, before you learn C, before you learn D. And that it takes a long time to do it, and you learn A in first grade and B in second grade. And we especially have this mindset about mathematics. And that's why I hear from more homeschoolers who are worried about their kids' mathematics development than anything else. So let me tell you my observations about kids who never studied mathematics at all until they decided they wanted to go to college. And then they said, oh, there's the SAT and I've got to do that. And I want to go to this fancy college that requires the SAT. And so I guess I'm going to have to learn that mathematics. Now, the difference between a 10-year-old who's being forced to learn stuff he's not interested in and a 16 or 17-year-old, even if he's not planning to major in math, but who wants to go to college, who knows I've got to learn that math, is night and day. That kid can learn that math so quickly, you would just be amazed. And it doesn't take a great genius to do it. The difference is motivation. The child who's decided, I want to go to college and I know I've got to learn this math, even though I may not ever use it again in my life because I'm going to major in art history, you know, will learn that math. And I've seen that over and over and over again. I've written about it. So don't worry if your child isn't doing math. Let your child do math when your child wants to do math.
Is that the same for the violin?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell
asking for a friend.
I know you're teasing.
And I just had one other thought to cycle back around to the assessments stuff. Really watch what your state says, because some people try to give the state or the school districts way more than they ask for. Like the county I'm in, I can send a letter in and send by someone looking at a portfolio and they did work in math and English this year. And that's all I need for an assessment. So really look at what your state is doing, because you might be putting way more of a burden on your shoulders than you have to.
This is an absolutely great discussion that, of course, we could talk all night long, but of course we can't do that. But I just wanted to let you know that Dr. Peter Gray has some amazing TED Talks that are super interesting. So if you wanted to hear more about that, the links to those will be in the chat. The Decline of Play is a really, really great TED Talk. So make sure you get a chance to listen to that. And also, our next webinar is next Thursday, October 22nd, Creative Homeschooling, Co-ops, Pods, and more. And the week after that, October 29th, Kids Screen Time, Managing the Pros and Cons. You can learn more and register at www.hslda.org/webinars. And during those, of course, during the first one, homeschooling, co-ops, pods, and more, you'll learn all about the types of groups, co-ops, pods, big or small subgroups, you know, foreign language arts. So if you're interested in any of that, be sure to catch that webinar. If you're making the transition to homeschooling this fall, we'd love to have you come alongside with encouragement and practical support so you can learn more about HSLDA membership at hslda.org/join. So this has been exciting, and of course we never ever want it to end, but of course we have to. Are there any last minute takeaways you would have, Stacy, that you want to leave our audience with about deschooling?
I just say, have fun, enjoy your kids. I mean, we homeschool because they're only with us for a very short 18 years. And I could not stand the idea of sending my 5-year-old away to school for the majority of their day. So have fun, enjoy your kids, and grow as a family.
That's awesome. Dr. Gray, you opened us up with some statistics, just some amazing statistics that I think that we will remember forever. Any current statistics on just, you started talking about how kids were doing. What about current, do you have any statistics on, how kids are doing pro-COVID versus how they're doing now with some of the virtual schooling, anything like that you can share with us?
Well, one thing, I read a blog for Psychology Today magazine, and I published 2 posts in August. You could easily Google them, Peter Gray, Psychology Today, free to learn blog, that are surveys that I helped conduct through the foundation called Let Grow. These were large surveys of demographically balanced surveys of American families that had children between the age of 8 and 13. And we asked a number of questions. And one of the surveys was done in April, this past April, about a month after most schools were locked down. And again in May, 2 months after schools were locked down. And we asked the same set of questions. And among the questions were things like, to the children, we asked, are you more calm or less calm now than when you were in school? Twice as many said more calm as who said less calm. We asked of the parents, is there more tension between you and your child now than there was before the pandemic? Now, you would think there would be more tension, right? The kids are home all day long. The kids, their parents are trying to do their work, and these are not parents who've made a decision to homeschool. They haven't figured this all out. You would think everybody thought this would be a disaster for families. 80% of the moms said less tension now than before. Well, to me, it wasn't terribly surprising, because where does the tension come from? It comes from school. It comes from getting that kid up in the morning who's not getting a full night's rest. Kids need to sleep late in the morning, especially teenagers do. Getting them up to go off to school, making them do their homework, parting them off to all those extracurricular activities that everybody thinks is so important. Suddenly those were all shut down. And lo and behold, what we learned from the parents part of the interview, is many of the parents discovered for the first time that they actually like their kids, that they like their kids being around, that their kids are actually helping out, they're cooking, they're doing laundry, and they don't have to amuse their kids all the time. Their kids are very good at taking initiative. Now, that doesn't mean that everything's rosy. Of course not. I mean, I don't want to say that this pandemic is a good thing. It's a terrible thing. And also, it's the downside of it for the kids, of course, is they can't get out and see their friends. They can't get out and play physically with their friends. But isn't it interesting? So here's this pandemic, and everybody thought this was going to be so hard on the kids. And it turns out that at least during those first 2 months, the kids are happier, less stressed. The parents are getting along well with the kids. The parents have developed a new appreciation of their own kids as they see how well their kids are coping. I think there's a lot of reason to take an optimistic message from this. And I think people who have decided to homeschool have recognized that. They've recognized that their kids, first of all, need to be able to sleep. They need to be able, and they need time to, I mean, think of what a poet tells you about childhood. What is childhood all about? It's not about cramming for tests. What a desecration of childhood if that's what it becomes about. You know, you need time, you want time to lie in the grass and look up at the clouds and then turn around and look at the bugs underneath you. You want time to daydream, you want time to be bored. Every great genius has become so because of that kind of time where they can just think, just reflect, discover what they like to do. And that's the gift that you're giving to your child by permitting your child to follow more of their own interests. They have more free time than they would have if they were attending school.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Gray and Stacy and Sandra for this amazing discussion. And thank you everybody for attending our webinar. Be sure to catch the next one next Thursday. Creative homeschooling, copods, pods, and much more. Thank you.